Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Raphael. So yes, I'm Leslie Rule. I'm a council member in Ojai, California, and I am here to talk about our Elephants' Rights Ordinance and how it came to be. Let's see. Let's do this. So I started this thinking that this would be a process story. It would be a process, but in actuality, it's a story. So I'm going to tell you the story of how we got the Elephant Rights Ordinance passed. I'm in the legislature, so I'm an elected official. I'm not in academia, I'm not in the academy, and I'm not a lawyer. So, although I have a son who is. So I want to keep that perspective, is that I'm an elected official. I am out on the street talking to people all the time and getting a sense of what the population would be willing to allow to be passed.
I'm Steve Solano.
And I'm Phyllis Guerini.
And this is Tara. Welcome to tonight's show. Ojai 84 visits Tara the Elephant. Garrett King's musical group is here, and we'll see what magician Clark James has up his sleeve this time. All this and more on Ojai 84. Welcome. We're here in the mountains of Ojai with Carol Buckley, the owner and trainer of the world's only roller skating elephant, right?
Right.
How long have you had this Tara?
Well, I've been with her since she was about 2 months old. She's 10 years now. And I bought her when she was about 2.5 years old.
What inspired you to get an elephant?
No inspiration. I'd been working with animals. I liked animals, and it just one thing led to another. And I found out about Tara. She needed someone to take care of her, and so I took care of her, and then that evolved into training her and getting booked in an amusement park, and then I bought her.
That's neat. Now, what inspired the roller skates?
Need of money. The need of money. We needed to do something different.
You needed a gimmick, right?
Yes. Single elephants were not real popular in circus. You want big herds. So we needed something to do that we could use as a promotional gimmick.
I guess it worked out all right.
Yeah, it has.
That's neat.
What's it like living day to day with an elephant? I mean, you do to bathe in the nearby creek, and usually gets to once a day, and more often when it's hot. Although Tara has made national headlines, done commercials, played numerous fairs, made circus appearances, and has been featured on NBC's Real People, Carol insists that Tara's own well-being and happiness is her main concern.
Okay, that was Tara the elephant. So indeed, Ojai at one time did have an elephant, and that helped us quite a bit to answer the question, why Ojai, why elephants? We were able to harken back to 1984, and you can see the ability, that's a conversation starter right there, because what was fine in 1984 seems a little bit dodgy in 2022. So this is, these two pictures on the right are Carol and Tara in downtown Ojai, and the picture on the left is Carol and Tara at Venice Beach, which is a place where people go to see and be seen. So after that, let's all take a breath, because that's a little bit much. Geez, okay, so we've all taken a deep breath, we're all good. And the story unfolds. So this is not the end of where Tara did not end up in a barn in Ojai, although that may have been where she was in 1984. So the Ojai Elephant Rights Ordinance, I'm just going to briefly go over it. The purpose of the ordinance was just to protect the fundamental right to bodily liberty for elephants within the city's jurisdiction. It's really that simple. That is what the law says, the ordinance says, and that was our intent. The scope of the ordinance, it just recognizes elephants as having fundamental rights. We all know we are an informed audience. So whereas when I'm speaking on the street to my constituents or over coffee, a lot of this has to be explained deeply because what you're really trying to do is move them from one understanding to another. But you guys are already moved, so I'm going to breeze through this part. The City Council action, so we introduced the ordinance on September 12th in 2023, and we scheduled a separate reading on September 26th. So 2 weeks later, I'll go through that process a little bit, what the legislative process is for us. And this is really important, and I did not get the significance of it. So it's any law that you pass has to go through the California Environmental Quality Act, which is CEQA. And it's used to stop a lot of projects. It has become a tool that people use to stop projects. But what is really interesting here is that we used it as a way to bolster the idea that elephants are natural resources. So what that actually did was it gave us two prongs into the possibility of elephants as rights holders. Because here they're natural resources, and that gives you another way to protect for natural resources, especially if you're looking forward into rights of nature. So, the ordinance in action, the right to bodily liberty, exceptions for accredited sanctuaries. So, for bodily liberty, it basically grants elephants in Ojai the fundamental right to bodily liberty. The exception for accredited sanctuaries is that, if you are an accredited sanctuary, well, you can come to Ojai and pretty much have an elephant. There are, guidelines and standards that you would have to follow, but you can do that. Prohibited practices, specifically, I'll just talk about one that we were very concerned with. So, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but to the east of us, about 3 hours, is the Fresno Chaffee Zoo, who had a herd of elephants that the Nonhuman Rights Project had a case in front of the Supreme Court, and a lot of their argument hinged on the fact that these elephants that were taken from the wild and brought over were being used for breeding practices. So they would bring in a bull elephant. There were 3 females, a mother, a daughter, and a third, and they would be used for breeding, and then the elephants would be sold to other zoos. So that was specifically something that we put in as a prohibited practice. And there were a couple others as well. Enforcement mechanisms. What we didn't want to do is give anyone the ability to say, you're adding on burdens to our ability to follow the law. So basically what we did, the enforcement mechanism is basically a citation. So there's no sort of, you're not arrested. It's a very minimal sort of penalty, right? Because we didn't want to give anyone the opportunity to say that, elephants, Ojai, heavy penalties, why? So we tried to take some of those big whys out of the equation. So the environmental determination was just the CEQA, right? So it was the California Environmental Quality Act, which every law has to have. So here's the ordinance's journey from the first reading to adoption. The first reading, which is really the introduction to the ordinance, was on August 22nd. Then on September 12th, we had what is known sort of as a concept review. So it gives people more of a chance to come in and comment and give their opinions on of the ordinance. And then 2 weeks later, we had the second reading. So the way the council works in Ojai is you have an administrative report. So you have an agenda, right? And because in California, everything has to be open for public comment. So your agenda is required to come out 72 hours in advance to give the public the right to speak on the public's interests. So you put out an agenda, there's an administrative report that is supposed to be neutral, and then there's a recommendation. So the person who does this administrative report is the city manager. And the city manager is like the CEO of the town. We're a municipal corporation with the city council being the board of directors. So we're the boss of the city manager. The city manager writes the administrative report. So while we don't write it, we certainly have not a really heavy hand, but a sufficient amount of weight on what that administrative report looks like. Because that's what's in the official record. So that's the first thing that comes out is the administrative report. Then you have the administrative report is read, and any council members who have questions can ask questions specifically on the administrative report. They get answers. Then we move on to general public comment. And in the United States, like I said, the public has a right to speak on all public matters. So we have 3 minutes of comment, and the public is given 3 minutes to comment on the administrative report, the concept, actually whatever they want, right? I mean, it's your 3 minutes. Say what you want. And then we go back into discussion, and eventually a motion is made and a vote is taken. And so that's kind of the process. So that's where we were on the second reading and adoption of the ordinance. Most times, the second reading is what's known as under the consent calendar, which is there's no argument. We've already done this. We're just going to do, we'll have 8 items on the consent calendar, all of things from the past agendas, and we just pass it. This did get pulled off. Every council member has a right to pull anything off. The public can also pull it off and say, I'd like to speak on consent item H. So you pull it off, and the public speaks to it, and if the council members are so inclined, we can have discussion, or we can say, thank you very much, who'd like to make a motion to pass. Just depends on, what you want to do that day. So on October 26th, a month later, an ordinance takes effect, and in November, the initial implementation. But in early 2024, and this is how the connection happens, the California Supreme Court, the NHRP, was filing an appeal on behalf of the elephants in the Fresno Zoo, who were being used as brood elephants, as well as the captivity and all of the normal kinds of constraints that were given on them that the NHRP was fighting. Why we did this, why this was so important, is that we wanted this ordinance to be part of their appeal. We wanted the California Supreme Court to understand that as a municipality, not as separate individuals, but as a municipality, as a governing agency, that we no longer supported our town, everybody in it, no longer supported having elephants in captivity. And that was why this was on such an accelerated timeline. And it really helped, once again, in speaking to people. It's like, why elephants? Why Ojai? Why now? Well, why now is this, right? We need to have this as part of the appeal packet that goes to the Supreme Court. And that carried weight with people. I mean, it really did. All of these kinds of arguments carried weight in different ways with different people. But that was the idea of pushing this through from August 22nd to September 26th. It was written and done. And I'm going to talk about the NHRP's participation in this. And I will just give you a little, it can't be overstated how important our connection with them was in this process. All right. Oh, go baby. Oh. Go back, baby. Okay, so the main arguments that we heard from the citizens of Ojai was legal chaos. And of course, this came from lawyers. We have a lot of lawyers that live in Ojai. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Ojai, but it's a small boutique town in California, an hour and a half from LA, and it's where retired people from LA who have lots of money come, which benefits us in many, many ways, I will say. So legal chaos, you're going to throw a grenade into the middle of the legal system. I mean, we know that argument, right? We understand Western legal jurisprudence and those kinds of things. So, we obviously spoke to that concern and said, There's actually many things to say. I've been to, I think, 4 of these trials, and I've listened to the arguments. And I think was mentioned earlier that judges want the legislature to give them some guidance, right? It's not just this isn't part of the judicial responsibility, it's part of the legislature's responsibility. Judges don't feel competent, capable, and they're certainly not willing to push laws into unknown areas. So the legislature doing this was really also very important. We'll talk about, sort of the pros and cons of that, what happens when the legislature does something versus when, a judge does something. Welfare regulations are adequate. We all know that argument, so there's really no need to go into it. I will say that, you need laws to protect protections. It's really just that simple. And why elephants? I like mountain lions. We have mountain lions. And so, there was certainly that question, why elephants? And once again, there was nothing to do but tell the truth, that we had an ulterior motive for this. It was very important that we pass an animal rights ordinance. That just philosophically, ethically was incredibly important. Elephants, because we wanted it to be part of the NHRP's appeal, and it seemed to be that's where the momentum was, right? In the United States, the main fights have been about elephants, about Happy from the Bronx Zoo. We have the Fresno elephants that are 3 hours from us, and also we recently had a death in the euthanasia in the Santa Barbara Zoo of their only living elephant. So we were able to connect it, but it's a good point. Why not mountain lions? And of course, we don't have the science for mountain lions. That was also a really important point, is that we needed to have the science to make the argument for habeas corpus, to expand the great writ. We needed the science. We needed to say all of the things that we use to evaluate humans and the right to their liberty. All of those things also are found in elephants, and here's the science that says so. And that's also an incredibly strong argument, and it finds successful form in Ojai. But we still all like mountain lions. And the slippery slope to absurdity. So Larry, a citizen of Ojai, I won't say his last name, who speaks on every item, 3 minutes. So if we have 8 items, he has 25 minutes a night. And we have 5 of those people. That's democracy in action, yay you. So he always does the slippery slope argument. So he would come up and say, okay, does my dog now get to vote? And so, reasonable, and we're happy to answer that. No, your dog doesn't get to vote. We're happy. That gives us an opportunity to talk about the way that you start to think about which animals get what rights and how that all works. And also, of course, you can talk the difference between a domesticated animal and a wild animal, a domesticated animal zoo. But it's a good conversation to have. And we had it many, many, many times. Okay. Oh. So I'm going to talk, and we also kind of all understand animal welfare versus animal rights. And I think that we might have a discussion of that later. But for me, and especially given what's happening in our country right now, we know that animal welfare, that is protections, are dependent upon agencies willing to enforce those protections. Rights, on the other hand, if you have standing, and part of this was who has standing, is you can go in front of a judge and you can say, this right is being violated. I don't need to go to an agency to ask them if they would enforce this protection. And that's the fundamental difference right there, among many, many, many other differences. And just the basic inadequacy of animal welfare laws. So these are all the arguments that we made. Ojai is very animal friendly. We have a turtle conservancy that's really, really, really well thought of. I mean, we're in the mountains, we have very few water sources, especially after a 20-year drought, but we have a very successful and acclaimed Turtle Conservancy. We also have a raptor center for rehabilitation of raptors. We also have a humane society. So, that is a shelter, basically, but it's a great shelter. And this is within 4 square miles. We do love our animals. Recognizing the rights, we know what that means, what happens when you actually have a fundamental right. It is just simply you can go in front of a court and say that this right is being abused. You don't have to find an agency to do that for you. And it allows you to protect, on a very proactive way, animal interests. I know we all know this. This is just sort of how we used, we needed to educate our population as well. It wasn't just simply to, keep the hordes from showing up with pitchforks, which of course nobody did. But we needed to start educating our constituents and our town and our area, because we knew that we would be sort of submitting and trying to pass other legislation. So this is the Ojai Valley, the people and the place relationship. We're environmentally progressive community. We're a small community, population basically about 8,000 now. We're 4 miles by 4 miles, the valley. But we have the larger Ojai Valley. It's about 30,000 people, and everyone in the Ojai Valley considers them to be Ojai residents. They basically don't know that they don't live in the city jurisdiction. So we have a much larger audience than just the voters in Ojai. Median age is 48 years. Racial composition is 71%, which is the result of a lot of gentrification, people moving into our beautiful valley. Educated, some very, very affluent. This is really important, is that it is considered a very spiritual place. We are on Chumash land. We have the Theosophists, who were Krishnamurti. We're one of the only 2 places that have Theosophists. And because we are a valley that runs east to west rather than north to south, we have a vortex. And we have a lot of people that come to feel the energy of the vortex and to commune with using crystals. We have a lot of crystal gazers and a lot of yoga, a lot of wellness. That's just the community that we live among. And we have legacy rural and agriculture. So we have avocados, which are lovely, and oranges and lemons. So that's our agricultural community. And this one I like. We are precedent setting, and we take great pride in being the first. So that's also a way to convince me. We will be the first ever in the United States to do this. People are like, okay, that's a good idea. Kind of like that. We're special. So I decided that my outreach would be to the kindred. So I wasn't going to check in with the 8th generation farmer. I was going to check into the spiritual seekers, the lovers of nature, and the people that are all about the animals, the turtle people, the raptor people, the shelter people, and me. I mean, we're all about the animals. I looked for the connections and the intersections, and I explored those with each, trying to get them to understand it from different perspectives. And I told the stories because I'm a storyteller. I worked for our PBS, which is our version of the PBC, in the education department, doing digital storytelling for years and years and years, teaching people how to find, tell, create, and publish the stories of their lives. So stories are important, and for me, they're easy to tell. So it was a good strategy. We wanted to build the coalition. So it was 1-to-1, and it was 1-to-many. So if I knew Dale was all about the animals, I would have her speak to the lovers of nature. So it was a 1-to-1, but it was also a 1-to-many kind of communication. It was all grassroots. We are sitting down and having coffee. We're walking in the farmer's market, and we see somebody that we know, and that's pretty much how it happened. And then we listened to their stories, and I highlighted the urgency. This has to go into the packet with the Supreme Court. It has to. That has to be there, because I felt it would add this gravitas that there was no other way to get, that you could finally say a municipality, right? A governing agency had decided that this was something that should happen in this country. So down there is the normal sort of process that you would do. I didn't do that. I did that. And it was a lot more fun. And except for there were the lawyers. Always the lawyers. Okay. So, so we talked to the lawyers, and it was great. They understood. If you tried to talk about the habeas corpus, great writ, they understood that. They didn't care, but they understood it, and so that was also very affirming. It was good to be able to explain the legal perspective as well to the lawyers. We didn't really get much buy-in, but we also didn't get any pushback. So that was good. So I really feel like it was our spiritual foundation that allowed this to happen. So we have Chumash legacy, that's our indigenous peoples. They're a very, very strong force in the community. They're well thought of. And so I wanted to really kind of take advantage of them. I will, the Chumash, as probably here in Britain as well, if you're going to do any kind of building, any kind of excavation whatsoever, you need to get a tribal elder to come out and basically say it's okay to do this. There are no relics here, there are no artifacts, you can do that. So that's one form of the Chumash connection that remains in the modern Western world. But we also have many organizations, including our school board, that read this invocation at every meeting. The city council doesn't do it, and I'm not quite sure why, except for the previous city council was a little bit more conservative than us, and I think that they weren't down with it. So this is the acknowledgement that is read, for instance, at the school board and at most meetings. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathering on the traditional territory of the Chumash people. We acknowledge the ancestral and unceded lands of the Chumash people on which we are located. We are committed to ensure that our processes here make room for their Chumash and indigenous voices to be heard, their traditional ecological knowledge of these territories to be listened to, and their peoples to be part of the healing of these lands and waters as well as themselves. So this is embedded in the culture. This is read. This is read at meetings. Like I said, at every school board meeting, this is read. So there's a deep connection with the Chumash.
And so they sang a song of gratitude. Ahile la sunu, ahile la sunu. Wawala wakai, wawala wakai, wawala wakai. And so every year, as that time came for the reciprocities of honoring all life in this world, we did that. We sang them songs, we danced in their in regalia, and just gave our gratitudes.
So this is Julie. She is a Chumash elder. She's in the coffee shop. She's on the ground. So given the political landscape right now in America, every second Saturday we have protests in the middle of downtown Ojai in front of our park. So we're out there protesting. And we were out there protesting, and it's mostly people that look like me, not a lot of young people. And we have our signs, and we're out there protesting, and we get this aroma coming, and we're like, oh, somebody's smoking pot. That's okay, it's legal in California, more power to you. We turn around, it's Julie basically with her sage, and she's spreading sage all over the protesters, to give them good vibes. It was like, okay, that's where we live. So that's the kind of thing that happens in Ojai all of the time. Yeah. So the Theosophists, they believe in the oneness of all. So we have the Theosophists have a huge campus in Ojai, and it's we have Krishnamurti. He has a school there that kids from all over the world come to attend, and it's really embedded in the culture of Ojai, is the oneness of all. It's just the oneness of all. And so we have artists and environmental community vision. That also lives in Ojai. It's a place where artists come because, all of the other reasons, the spiritual reasons, and that it's, nature. So especially the visual artists are very connected with the land. So most of the paintings that come out are, paintings of landscapes and paintings of animals and very impressionistic kinds of things. And this also is really embedded. It's in the thread of our community. And spiritual traditions as legal foundation. We know that rights of nature, at least I know, don't want to speak for you, that rights of nature are the legal foundation of the rights of nature are based on the spiritual traditions of indigenous peoples. In fact, that's where rights of nature are successful and haven't been overturned, is on sovereign lands of First Peoples. Throughout the states, there have been people like me who have tried to pass legislation and it immediately goes to court. There's reasons why Ojai hasn't been taken to court for both our rights of nature and also for our elephants, is that there's nobody there who has a pony in that race or a dog in that fight. We don't have a zoo that wants to fight us because they see the writing on the wall. We just don't have big commercial interests who are willing to come to this small little town and fight particular legislation so that it doesn't become precedent and doesn't lead to, bigger and worse things. So I have to bow down, honestly, to the Nonhuman Rights Project. So everybody has an origin story of how they came to animal rights. So here's my origin story. So I lived in Western Massachusetts for about 10 years. I'm from the Bay Area in San Francisco originally. And I lived up on the northern border in Vermont, and I'm driving along in my Jeep, and this TED Talk comes on the radio. And it's Stephen Weiss, who was the executive director of the Nonhuman Rights Project, and he says that in upstate New York, they're going to have a standing trial appearance in front of a judge for Happy the elephant in the Bronx Zoo. And I, driving along in my Jeep and not being a lawyer, I think that means that, this judge is going to be deciding if elephants get rights. And I'm like, well, I got to be there. So I drive across, two states to get to upstate New York, and I arrive very early in the morning. It's winter, it's snowy, it's great. And I get there before anyone else, and then the Nonhuman Rights Project folks come up, and I'm like, are you Happy's team? And they're like, yeah, we're Happy's team. And I'm like, I'm here. If animals are going to be given rights, I want to be here. I'm here. And they're like, okay, well, this is a standing trial. And I'm like, okay, what's that? And it's like, well, we're just going to find out if we have standing to bring this, if we can bring it. I'm like, okay, well, But I did I met all of the non-human rights people. And that was my origin story. And I listened to Stephen Weiss make the argument for the Great Writ, the expansion of habeas corpus. And I thought it was brilliant. I mean, sometimes you get hit by a ton of bricks, whether it's a song that you heard or an idea that comes your way. And I was like, that is genius. That is it. That is how we do it. And then I, started to be friends with them and went to the trial in New York and went to the trial in Connecticut and showed up for protests and wrote educational materials because that's kind of my background. And when we were ready, as I started to learn more, it was 3 years later I moved back to California to Ojai, and I joined. I ran and I was on the council, and I suddenly realized that we're a small town. If we want to pass legislation, we can do it. We have 5 people on the council. 3 votes can do anything. We can turn off the lights in Ojai if we want. And this is really interesting because 3 votes can do anything, and the only way to counteract 3 votes is obviously, you can have direct representation. You can do an initiative and get the people to overrule you, but that is a long, expensive, complicated process. If you want to get the council to do something if you want to undo a council's action because you believe it to be illegal, you actually have to sue them, right? The council is the final word unless you go to court and say that this is against the law. So that's my life hack. 3 votes of the council can do anything. And if you're a small town, then you can see how that can be worked to do what you feel is right, especially if you're in the environment that Ojai is. You don't, I mean, honestly, don't tell anyone, I was elected by 17 votes. There was a big push to elect my opponent. But I knocked on every door in my constituency. So 3 votes can do anything. And I came to understand that. And that was the power, right? I just needed 3 votes. So I'm going to give you, so the Nonhuman Rights Project, I knew that I could get the 3 votes, right? But I also knew there were problems with drafting legislation. There were, there's a lot of sort of roadblocks and barriers once you get the 3 votes. So I turned to the Nonhuman Rights Project. They literally handed me the ordinance. They drafted it for me. They took one that they were drafting for LA, and they know Ojai. Courtney Fern, who's their director of governmental relations, she lives in LA. Everybody in LA knows Ojai. It's just, what you do. So they drafted everything for me. They did, they did the 1-sheets about it. They did the press about it. They facilitated 90% of this. And so for those of you who are nonprofits or who have, who have these kinds of things already developed or who can easily develop them, it makes it possible for legislatures to pass it through. Because otherwise I would have had to gone to the city attorney and explained it to him, had him try to understand, which would be a rabbit hole for sure. So we're talking months before the legal minds who have never encountered this concept could get it together enough to produce an ordinance, and then it would be a funky ordinance to begin with because they really didn't understand. This just cut through all of that, right? Here's the ordinance. So that's why we were able to do it in a month and get it passed, and it was implemented a month later. So from start to finish, it was really 2 months. Everything that initially, I've done a lot of my own research since then, but comes from the Nonhuman Rights Project and the work that they do and the thinking that they do for me. So it's just been a huge boon, and it makes it possible for us to do what we do, because otherwise the hurdles are very, very great. Okay, and I love them. So here we are, we passed the ordinance. On the right there is Courtney Fern, so she came up from LA. That's our council. On the left, in the blue suit, looking kind of goofy, is our city attorney, but he's an animal lover. He fits into one of those 3 categories. And on the far left there is our city manager, who was from Fresno, where the 3 elephants live, and a good friend of his was involved in trying to figure out an acceptable way to have elephants in the zoo. So he was aware of everything, and so they also facilitated it. They were happy to give comments and press releases, and that's the group right there. I will, because I have to. So there's Courtney Fern, Nonhuman Rights Project. Next to her is Councilmember Rachel Lang. She's an astrologer. Next to her is Councilmember Susan Francina. She's a yoga teacher. Next to her is Mayor Betsy Sticks. She's also a yoga teacher. There's me, the Harvard graduate who only cares about elephants and pickleball. And then our city attorney and our city manager. So that was the team that passed this. So you can see, I'm somewhat flippant about this, but it wasn't this. We had to take what we have and talk to people in the way that they could hear. And this is our group. But those 4 categories, the ethical imperative, the philosophical framework, the legal strategy, and the landmark cases, all came from the Nonhuman Rights Project. So that is how they frame what they do. So I think I've spoken about the Fresno-Chaffee Zoo connection, but this was the urgency part of it. And we did get that ordinance into the appeal packet. Ultimately, the Supreme Court did not decide for the elephants, but they also didn't dismiss the argument. So this was really important as well. You know, you don't dismiss this as just one city. I don't even know Josh, but I loved this. This was the point. It means that U.S. courts can no longer claim there is no precedent. We are a small town with a council that has 2 yoga teachers, an astrologer, an elephant fan, and yeah, there we go. But we were able to do that. Didn't matter who we were. We did it.
Give us any signs that
Okay,
they're feeling
another video.
uncomfortable, and so we kind of let them take the lead.
The Elephant Sanctuary has provided home and care to 33 elephants since opening their doors nearly 30 years ago. The sanctuary says they have the space to welcome more. The decision to transfer an elephant is up to their owner or the government if abuse is suspected. But it's no easy feat getting the elephant, heavier than an SUV, to Tennessee. 44-year-old Donna made that trek from the Oakland Zoo in California last year.
Donna, she's a cheeky little girl. She is one of those elephants that came to us with a little bit of social anxieties. This team has poured in a lot of hours to get her comfortable with the other elephants here. We work with her every day just to make sure she's still acclimating to sanctuary.
No signs of social anxiety here, a true testament to this team's dedication as these elephants trot off into the sunset.
So I have to give props where props are due. Where do you suppose Tara the elephant ended up? The elephant sanctuary in Tennessee. Who do you think started the elephant sanctuary in Tennessee? Carol. Yes. Yes. So 10 years she was on the road with Tara the elephant. Then something happens, right? You start to realize, you start to see. And you figure out what you're going to do next. And she bought, I don't know, it was like 150 acres in Tennessee, and Tara was the first elephant in the elephant sanctuary. So stories do end how they end. So that kind of ends my talk. I did briefly just want to mention that I wanted to give props to Ojai because we did. I just want to tell you that basically we are considered sort of the animal rights poster child writ large for animal rights in the towns. So we've passed 4 sort of animal rights ordinances. The first one was the elephant's right to bodily liberty. Then we passed the rights of nature, and I'm certainly happy to speak about that and speak about, this was the rabbit hole for our city attorneys, but they were very, very smart, and that's a whole different story. We passed a glue trap ban, which means that you can't catch rodents on a glue trap. But what we did with that is just to sell in Ojai. Right? It's not to use because people don't like bans, but you can, we have 2 hardware stores, so we can just simply tell them you can't, against the law to have glue traps and sell them, so you can't do that. That doesn't mean that people don't go right over the border into the valley to the other hardware store, but it's still a ban and you still can't sell them there in Ojai. And the last one that we had was a breeding ban on brachycephalic. So basically the animals with smushed faces. So in Ojai, you cannot breed those. You can have them, but you can't breed them. Not backyard breeders, not commercial breeders, not that we have any. There's no breeding of that. And that actually caused the most uproar of any of these because all the pug lovers were there. All the boxer lovers were there. Telling us, how wonderful their dogs were, and nobody contested that. But it was, once again, an eye-opening kind of thing when you start breeding for these genetic conditions that are, for all intents and purposes, torture for the animals. And so maybe we opened a few eyes. We certainly got, a few public comments on that one. Somebody brought their pugs, asked us how we could possibly do this to these beautiful creatures. Anyway, that concludes my talk. I thank you very much for your attention. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.